All right, so I introduced you guys to the word syllabus shock. It's really not that bad. The course objectives, to be able to recount the love and grace of God as we see it in the Pentateuch, because I have a pet peeve. I hear so many people talk about the Old Testament being a portrait of the God of anger. And I think we're going to see, starting today, that no, the Old Testament shows a God of redemption, a God of love, calling the cosmos out of chaos. And we're going to see that today. Understanding that, to be able to recall the contents of the book well enough to discuss it intelligently with other adults. That's kind of a basic. Explain the meaning of the passages studied well enough to be able to expound on them. Evaluate, this is important, evaluate the other interpretations you're going to hear to be able to sift truth from falsehood. Because there are thousands and thousands of opinions. Some of them have good scholarly basis. Some of them are one of the thousands and thousands of opinions. So being able to recognize that. Being able to discern the relative importance of what each of these books teach well enough to emphasize what is important and what is less important in your ministry. Because there's the assumption here that we're here for a reason. And it's not just to fill our heads with knowledge, but first and foremost to hopefully grow closer to God, but also to be able to turn around and teach to others. Apply the passages to your personal life. That might be somewhat important. And to appreciate the Word of God even that much more. And I think that as we see the love of God shining through in the Pentateuch, and you kind of look at this idea of law seems so often antithetical to love, that I think we're going to see that that is not the case. We're very, very lucky. The course textbook, I had the privilege, very great privilege, of having Tom Constable, Dr. Tom Constable, as my faculty advisor when I was in seminary. Little background on Tom. He has his PhD from Dallas Seminary, his PhD, I believe, is from Cambridge. And I had a fun time with Tom when I first took his course. The sum total page count of all of his notes for all 66 books was 780 pages roughly. Now here's what Tom does. When everybody else takes the summer off, Tom studies and he adds to his notes. So when I took Tom the second time I went back to Dallas Seminary, the page count for his notes for the Pentateuch was 1,200 pages, just for the Pentateuch. So here's what we're going to do. I'm not going to have you read all of Tom's notes. I think that would be, I had to. Glenda's laughing at me. Listen to nothing she has to say about me. What we're going to do is parse it out for what interests you. What interests you? Because for some people, like, I'm going to Jones on the creation narrative. I love the creation narrative. I think it's one of the most overlooked pieces of Scripture. People just gloss over it, and I think that there is so much meat there. So, what I would study on would be, choose to read, would be Tom's notes very deeply on the creation narrative. Somebody else might really get into genealogies. Genealogies can teach us a ton. I'm not that guy. So I'm giving you guys the freedom here to be able to choose what you want to read. And we'll get into this in a little bit more detail. I also gave, Wayne.
I'm not just saying for the class. Did anybody have trouble registering for the class and finding the site? Okay.
Absolutely.
But you're going to have to be able to get into the site to get to the textbook. So we need to make sure that everybody understands how to get that. You have the information, don't you? There's a code. You go to Google Classroom, and then there's a code, and we can, if you can get all the names and their phone numbers, we can make a group, and we can send all that information to make sure that you can get in, especially with the textbook. So if you want to register with Dr. Rogers, you may do that as well.
So you're saying we're gonna make a WhatsApp group for the class?
Yes. Good meeting, everybody. And I'll put my WhatsApp, and so if you have specific questions, just send me a note, and I'll.
Very good. Okay, thank you so much. Course schedule. I gave you some suggested readings. They're very, very good. If you want to, they're not required, so don't worry about that because they can be a little bit on the expensive side. But sometimes what we've had people do in previous courses I've taught is 2 or 3 people went in together, bought a text, and then donated it to the church library after everything was done. So today, we're going to review the syllabus. Introduction to Pentateuch. Date, authorship. Believe me, people can find tons of things to argue about. Like, okay, the Pentateuch tells us who wrote the Pentateuch. But people are going to argue about that, and we're going to get into that. The next week, we're going to touch on the Genesis prehistory to God's covenant with Abraham. That's going to be chapters 1 through, Genesis 3 through 14. Then the Abrahamic covenant. This is big. Then God's deliverance of the Israelites. Exodus 1 through 18. The consolidation of the nation unto God is week 5. Exodus 19 through 40. I have very bad eyesight, that's why I'm staring like this. Week 6, ritual and moral purity before God, the book of Leviticus. For those of you who are taking the course for credit, this is the day that the research papers due. And week 7, the challenge to remain faithful, Deuteronomy and Moses' reminder to the nation. Grading. Each student is expected to read the Pentateuch. Now, I'm going to pick on my wife because I can. I think it's fair to say you were not looking forward to reading the Pentateuch.
Sure.
Now, has that changed?
Yes. I mean, I wasn't really looking, just because offerings and genealogies, my eyes kind of glaze over. But, so I started with, I ate the frog first and read Leviticus and Numbers first, so I could just go, okay. And I ended up changing one, so.
Yeah, the phrase that she just used there, ate the frog, that's from Mark Twain. Mark Twain once said that if part of your job description includes having to eat a live frog every day, eat that frog first thing in the morning. Your day will only get better. So a lot of truth on that. Prayer. You guys, I really expect, I'm going to be praying for each of you guys by name and remembering your prayer requests as I do so. And I expect you guys to be spending at least a half a day in prayer and hopefully remembering the prayer, half an hour. Half an hour. Thank you, Connie. Half an hour in prayer each day. And hopefully remembering each other's prayer requests. Dr. Constable's expository notes. They are expansive, and I'm going to be very honest with you. He's probably the foremost scholar of biblical studies that's still alive right now. He has added to these notes for over 35 years. In some spots, they can be a little dry, and that's why I want to give you guys the freedom to say, I'm going to read the parts that are interesting to me. Each student is expected to keep a log of how much of his notes that they read. A C grade is reading 175 pages of Tom's notes. That sounds like a ton. It's 25 pages a week. It's really not that much, and this is 20% of the grade. You want a B read 200 to 225 pages. An A is 250 pages or more. And you'll find that as you get into it, because you can pick and choose exactly what interests you, that it's not going to be coming off as that much. My teacher's pet here has actually started reading Tom's notes, and you're kind of jonesing on him.
Oh, I am. I'm kind of, and so is Shawnee. And there are times when you're like, oh my gosh, can we get through this? You're warning me. But, like, I've been reading on his Sermon on the Mount notes because I'm doing the next class on Thursday too. And I just totally jonesed on learning so much more about his, about Matthew's chronology for writing Beatitudes the way they do, the way Jesus starts with the Beatitudes and then goes into the Sermon on the Mount. And Constable's notes are really great for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Kevin.
What does Jonesy mean?
Oh,
Oh, jonesing. Oh, sorry.
that's a very American expression. Yeah, yeah.
It just means it's really cool. It's a lot of fun.
Just loving it. Yeah.
She's getting into it.
Yeah, yeah, very good. So there's that. Quizzes. Guys, I'm not here to torture you guys. They're not going to be hard. There's probably going to be, on a multiple choice, one of the choices is going to be some ridiculous thing about my dog Chaucer. That's not going to be the right answer. But yeah, quizzes are really just to keep you up and get you ready for the final exam. Each one, 2 quizzes, 10%, so that's 20% total. Research paper, for those taking the course for credit, the research paper will count for 25% of the grade. Let's jump down to suggested paper topics. Identify and expound upon 3 examples of the grace of God in the book of Genesis. The grace of God in the book of Genesis. I'm giving you the details on the papers, 10 to 20 pages. It's not big. But it's only one.
I'm so glad that didn't come from me.
Yeah, it's good. You will ace this, I have no doubt. Okay, was the Noahic flood universal or localized? Present the evidence for both opinions and then give yours and defend why you chose what you chose. Explain the significance of Passover for both the Jew and the Gentile. I'm trying to come up with fun topics here. Detail the theological significance of the design of the Ark of the Covenant. There's a reason why such great detail was given, because it's meaningful. Now, if you want to do a different paper, if these topics don't light your jets or get you to Jones?
Jones.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Come to me with next class period and say, I want to do a paper on this. And we'll make arrangements for that. But tried to give you some fun paper topics here. Final exam. For those of you taking the course for credit, the final exam is going to be worth 25%. If you're not, the final exam is going to be worth 50%. But I'm going to let you know what the questions are. It should be very obvious by the end of today that I'm going to let you know what the questions are. Plagiarism. On the paper, be very, very careful to give credit where credit is due. It's just, it's important. People have spent oftentimes decades writing one book. So give them the credit they have due. So, thank you. Yeah, if I can get my pen back sometime, that would be great. So that's it. Do you have any questions on the syllabus? Do I need to get morphine for anybody, or you already have some? That's good. Okay.
So dates are count out 7.
7 classes.
7, so it'll end
I should have put that on the syllabus. I did not, because I want to reuse the syllabus later, which will have different dates. But Shawnee, I'll work with you on that because I know you have a pre-existing condition called service. And you're going to be teaching, so you're going to need to miss a few classes. But they'll all be online, and we can work together on that. So that's that. So let's jump in on the Pentateuch. Like I said, people are going to find, especially in the age of social media, people are going to find something to argue about. You can post a picture of an apple, and somebody's going to say, "Why do you hate pineapples?" I didn't say I hated pineapples. This is a picture of an apple. So authorship. Scripture and tradition attribute the authorship of the Pentateuch to Moses. It's been very, very clear. Now, I've spent a huge portion of my life in academia, and I can tell you this. Oftentimes, scholars try to make a name for themselves by being contrarians. I know it's hard to believe, utterly hard to believe, but yeah, they do. And so in the 1870s, the Mosaic authorship was challenged by a man by the name of Julius Wellhausen, who claimed that the Pentateuch actually had 4 different authors. Well, even though through the rest of the Old Testament and into the New Testament, the authorship is attributed to Moses, 4 different authors, and he named them. He named them for letters, J, E, P, D, using initials for the different names of God used in the Pentateuch. Because, well, that's Elohim. Well, if he's using that name, it has to be a different author then, isn't it? Of course. Well, no. The school of thought insists on multiple authors and a much later date than we have typically understood, by saying first that Moses could not have written the Pentateuch around 1450 because Moses didn't know how to write. There was no written language. Well, there's a problem there because archaeologists have identified significant Hebraic texts dating back to 1850 BC. That's about 400 years before. So yeah, there was Hebrew writing at that time. Hebrew was one of the first written languages actually in history, and it started off basically as an accounting language. So that's just kind of interesting. It was for trade. So yeah, also the hypothesis also denies any supernatural events or interventions. Well, if God doesn't intervene or behave in a supernatural manner, doesn't that kind of pull the rug out from under all of Judaism and Christianity? Kind of, a little bit. Finally, they claim that, I touched on this, the use of different names of God means there had to have been, 4 different names, man. There has to be 4 different authors. Today, in this class, in our prayer, we heard Wayne mention Jesus. We heard Wayne mention Christ. We heard Wayne mention God. Well, there have to be 3 different Waynes. No, I mean, it's an argument that doesn't work. And again, archaeologists have discerned that it was very common structure of writing in the early Hebrew times to mention different names of God to refer to different attributes of God. We do the same thing. I mean, when we're in a time of adoration, typically we're calling out to God the Father. When we're in a time of supplication, we're calling out either to Jesus or Christ or the Holy Spirit. Most scholarship now is leaning back towards the Mosaic authorship of the Pentateuch, but I wanted to just let you guys know it's out there, and it is an argument. The nature of the Pentateuch. Again, I'm really pleased everybody's here because the Pentateuch and Revelation are probably the 2 sections of Scripture that scare people the most. The nature of the Pentateuch. So many people go immediately to law. It's there. But the Pentateuch consists of the first 5 books of the Old Testament, unless you're Hebrew, in which case it's called the Torah, and it's one book. So, the Pentateuch reveals the nature of God. And we're going to see that today as we get to the creation narrative. Reveals the nature of God as loving, forgiving, creator, redeemer. It tells us, I grew up in the 70s. Well, Glenda will say I probably haven't grown up, but I was a young man in the 70s and 80s, and that was popular for people to say, I'm trying to find myself and see who I am. The Pentateuch tells us who we are. It tells us who we are. It gives us a universal sense of identity where we still keep our individuality. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. It also tells us what the heck is wrong with us. And what the heck is wrong with, you're smiling, what the heck is wrong with this world and why? So it's very, very detailed on that. It gives us a portion of the creation narrative, but it doesn't give us the beginning of the creation narrative. For the beginning of the creation narrative, you have to go to the New Testament, John 1:1. Ha hen arche, ha has logos. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through Him, and apart from Him, not even one thing came into being that has come into being. In Him was life, and the life was the light of mankind. The light of mankind. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not grasp it. That's a question. That's a question. Excuse me. I told you I'm going to let you know what's going to be on the test. So yeah, the first part of the creation narrative is found in the New Testament, John 1:1 through 5. It repeatedly demonstrates the grace, the unmerited favor of God. Right from the very beginning, you see the unmerited favor of God. Life during the time of Moses. Let's just pause and step back. They didn't have cell phones. I mean, it's crazy. It was so crazy different. Think on this. There are 8 billion people on the planet right now. 8 billion. There are 23,166,000 square miles of dry land on this earth. So there are roughly 34 people today per square mile of land. Now think on that. 34 people per square mile of land. Still, if you got in your car in Dallas and drove to Chicago, it has to be the most boring drive on the face of the planet. All you're going to see are cornfields. Really boring drive. At the time of Moses, there were 33 million people, not 8 billion, 33 million people on the face of the planet. The earth was so sparsely populated that in large swaths of the land, a man could walk for over 100 miles and not encounter another human. In certain parts of the globe, it was so sparsely populated that man was not the apex predator. Think on that. This is especially when we get into parts and narratives where it says that somebody has been cast out, sent away. Well, they can walk for days without encountering another human, because back then, like now, what do we tend to do? Do we space ourselves out evenly? You know, we cluster into villages, we cluster into cities. They did back then too, they were just smaller. But yeah, so think on that. Technically, this was the Bronze Age. No iron yet, no steel, Bronze Age. But for a huge swath of humanity, this was still effectively the Neolithic era. People still used, in many places, sharpened stones, obsidian, etc., as axes, knives. And the earth looked different. Just let this one sink in. The earth looked different. There were not a lot of Bronze Age axes to go chop down trees, to strip them down to make 2x4s. Think about going into a forest that has never heard the blow of an axe. What are the sizes of the trees? We lived in Wisconsin for a while, and there was a park close to us where they had preserved the stumps of the trees from the time that the loggers showed up in the 1860s, I think, and did the first cuts of the trees. These were 12 feet in diameter. You know, think about that, a tree stump, 12 feet in diameter. So things looked different. And there were horrors, there were terrors. I'm going to jump to the United States here because I find this so very interesting. 300 years ago, I've read three different narratives on this. 300 years ago in the Deep South, a catfish was considered a man killer because the catfish size could exceed 12 feet. Not anymore. You know, we've done a good job of hunting. We've done a good job of conquering. But we're looking at a very different world. And so when we talk about people wandering in the wilderness, that wilderness is very different. When you hear something in the night, there's a lot of terror, potential terror there. This is a very different life. Very scary place, very little security. We can complain about healthcare now, and we do. It's expensive, blah, blah, blah. There wasn't any. You know, I mean, think on that. But there is God. There is God. And that's what is so important here. With that, let's jump into Genesis, one of my very, very favorite books. Beautifully written. What type of literature is Genesis to begin with? Well, most people who have not studied it are going to say it's myth. Well, I can understand thinking that. Myth is a type of literature that seeks to explain the origin of things in symbolic form. This, however, because remember, this isn't our society, this is a different society. This, however, does not follow how the Hebrew understood his or her faith. To the Hebrew, a personal, absolutely sovereign God brought them into existence as a nation. It's part of the second, well, 2/3 of Genesis is God bringing Israel into being as a nation. Their worship at the temple was not cosmic and magical. Their temple worship instead was understood as an enactment of their redemption. An enactment of their redemption. Their concept of time was not limited to a primeval world, but they saw themselves and God as actors throughout all of history. Throughout all of history. Therefore, Genesis is not myth. So is Genesis a history? Well, I've spent a lot of my time teaching history at the university level, and I'm going to say no. It's very close. But no, it's not what we would consider a history per se. Genesis was never intended to be just a simple chronology of events or even the biography of a nation. Instead, it is a theological question, excuse me, a theological interpretation of events surrounding mankind in general and Israel in particular. Therefore, I'm going to call the book of Genesis a theological historical narrative. I'll say that again. A theological historical narrative. That might show up on a quiz, I don't know.
Can you say the sentence right before that?
Let's see.
Theological interpretation.
Yeah. Surrounding mankind in general, thank you, and Israel in particular. The theme of Genesis, well, it harkens to the name, doesn't it? It's beginnings. The theme of Genesis is beginnings of the universe, of, and this is very important, we're going to get into this today, of domains, of what fills those domains, of mankind, and of the Israelites. Purpose, the purpose of Genesis, is to demonstrate that God is sovereign, that He is the creator, and that He desires to have a love relationship with His people. Desires to have a love relationship with His people. That's not a bad way to start a book, is it? Yeah. Structure. Chapters 1 through 11 are going to be what we call prehistory. Now, it begs the question, how did Moses know what was going on because this was all before him? A couple of very easy answers to that. It could have been handed down through oral histories. And again, as a historian, you will be surprised how accurate oral histories can be. It could have been passed down as oral history. It also could have been direct revelation. I'm going to say we don't know. I tend to lean towards the direct revelation part because frankly there's some stuff in this prehistory that's not very flattering. We tend to forget those things or hide those things that aren't very flattering. But we don't really know. And then, chapters 12 through 50, the birth of Israel. The birth of this nation. To the original audience, the creation narrative demonstrated to the Israelites that the God who created the nation of Israel is the same God who created the world and all that is in it. There are a couple of implications here. First, it means that everything that exists must be under God's control. And next, here at the very beginning, we see that God is a redeeming God as He calls the cosmos out of chaos. Calls the cosmos out of chaos. That might show up again somewhere else. Think of that, redemption. That's pretty awesome. My throat's getting a little dry, and we usually take about a 10-minute break. So I'm going to say it's break time right now. I will see you guys in 10 minutes, and we will jump back in. That's kind of here too. Okay, guys, I'm going to call us back to some semblance of order here. I have been told that I am going too fast. My apologies. I get excited about things. If you can't tell, I get excited about this topic a great deal. So, yeah, Kevin.
Is this being recorded and put on?
Yes, it's being recorded. That's why you can't hear the mic. It's just feeding to the camera. So it's being recorded, and it's going to go onto the church Facebook page, and then it's going to migrate from there to YouTube, where it will be subtitled in Spanish.
Okay.
So,
Will
but
it go onto the Institute page as well?
yeah, yeah. So that's good.
So it's not Facebook Live, it's going on Facebook later.
I think it might be going live now, but being recorded there, and then it will be. Yeah, that's a really good point, guys.
Facebook access, so
Okay.
it's going onto the Institute page or?
It's going to be on YouTube. I will talk about seeing if we can get it onto the Institute page as well. But it's definitely going to be on YouTube. So that makes, taking notes a little bit easier. Also studying for exams a little bit easier, because you can always go back and say, what was he talking about? You can use whatever kind of grimacy faces you want to.
He's gotten a lot of this from me this week.
Yes, I have. Now I know how my dog feels when he comes over to me and goes, you know.
Well, the forum that we're gonna have, are we able to ask you questions if we have them there? Or-
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So again, God called the cosmos out of chaos. Think on that. There's such beauty there. Redemption. So with that, let's go to the original creation narrative. There are two. We're going to handle the first one today. Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the earth was a formless and desolate emptiness, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters.
First example of grace.
Yes, that's exactly what we're looking at here. Normally, this is incredibly interesting, and this is why I find the languages so important. This is incredibly interesting here. Traditionally, these two verses have been looked at in linear fashion by English speakers. By English speakers. By Hebrew speakers, however, it's very, very different. The linguistic clues in Hebrew lead us to believe that linear fashion for these two verses is not the intended case. The word bara, which is translated here as created, here doesn't just mean created. It means created in perfection. It stresses that this was formed new and perfect. And then we go to verse 2. And the earth was formless and void. Something has happened. Now, the theological term that people use to explain this is called gap theory. And gap theory is what I hold to, is simply this, that between verse 1 and verse 2, something significant happened. Because the picture we have of earth changing from being created in perfection to then being formless and void, well, that's quite different, isn't it? It's quite different. And then you have the picture of God hovering above the waters. When I was living in London, my very favorite place to go to was St. James Park. Has anybody been there? Isn't it beautiful? I mean, it's like Narnia. It's just amazing. And I was really lucky while I was there. There was a swan pair that had two cygnets in their nest, and their nest was just off of the shore. And if somebody would get too close to that nest, the mama swan, and you could always count on the wind. The wonderful thing about England, you go always count on the wind blowing the same direction all the time. The mama swan would just spread out her wings and rise. And she would just be motionless over that nest. And that's the word picture that we have here of God hovering over our world. What happened? Well, the answer is we don't know. Most of the scholarly speculation, theological speculation, for those who do ascribe to gap theory, is that this was the result of the Satanic rebellion. This is the result of the Satanic rebellion. We don't know that, but I do tend to believe that. It's the likelihood that our planet was the place that was the center of the Satanic rebellion, resulting in chaos. And so what we're going to see in the first 2 verses is the first recorded redemptive act of God. Well, that's a nice way to introduce a book, isn't it? In the first 2 verses, we're seeing the character of God already as Redeemer. The character of God as Redeemer in the first 2 verses of Genesis. And that's going to make me talk fast. Yeah, Connie.
Can I ask, so the Satanic Rebellion, is there a scripture reference where the gap theory would get that, or that's just a complete assumption?
It's a complete assumption. I'm just going to be completely honest with you on that. But something horrific happened because we had created in perfection to formless and void. But the main thing to pull from is that God immediately interjects himself and comes as protector and comes as redeemer.
What was that Greek word for creation that's protected?
It's Hebrew, bara. B-A-R-R-A. Yeah. But Hebrew's always tricky because they give suggestions for vowels, not the vowels themselves, but that's neither here nor there. So yeah, redemption. Calling the cosmos from chaos. Now we begin a series of creative acts. And I love how this is so illogical at first, and then you'll see the beauty in it. The series of creative acts, all of which follow the same pattern. The creative word, the report of its effect, God's evaluation of it as good, and the numbering of the day. Test question. Yes. Sorry. The creative word, the report of its effect. It happened. God's evaluation of it as good, and the numbering of the day, keeping the chronology, the numbering of the day.
The use of the word good is so underrated. You know that?
Yeah, I agree with you. What her statement is, the use of the word good is so underrated. I mean, when you think of the creator God of the universe using the word good, it's not like, good enough, said Mediocrities. No, this is the creator God looking at creation and calling it good. Verse 3, then God said, let there be light, and there was light. God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day and called the darkness night. And there was evening and there was morning one day. You see the pattern there. And the pattern's going to be repeated. Then God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters. Let it separate the waters from the waters. God made the expanse and separated the waters that were below the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse, and it was so. God called the expanse heaven. We would also call it sky. It's the same word. And there was evening, and there was morning a second day. Then God said, "Let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear," and it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering of the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. So what we see here, guys, and this is so exciting, God's creating domains. Think of all of these as domains. Light is a domain. Sky is a domain. The waters are a domain. The land is a domain. And now he's going to speak into each domain and bring creation out of those domains. I just love this. Tell me to slow down because I get excited.
Say something.
Yeah.
So it always talks about evening and then, the day.
Yeah.
In Judaism, they start the day at the nighttime.
Yeah.
That's where they count that.
Mm-hmm.
So when Shabbat starts, they always start with, the candles.
Yes.
And then it's that day.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, we tend to start it in our mornings.
Yes.
In Judaism, it's,
Right before.
yeah, exactly. Thank you for doing that, emphasizing.
right. And the other thing is, the name for Genesis is, they say Bereshit.
Uh-huh.
And just in the Hebrew word Bereshit is the whole gospel message.
Yeah.
In Hebrew.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it's absolutely beautiful. I love this book. It's so overlooked, but I absolutely love this. So, yeah, God creates these domains: light, waters, heavens, or sky, dry land, the seas. Now, with the domains in place, he will speak to the domains to call out creation. Then God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees on the earth bearing fruit according to their kind, with seed in them," and it was so. The earth produced vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their kind, and trees bearing fruit with seed in them according to their kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, a third day. So, yeah, exactly. Then God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from night." Now remember, there's already light. So he's filling those domains now. "And they shall serve as signs and for seasons and for days and years. And they shall serve as lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth." And it was so. God made the two great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. He made the stars also. God placed them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth and to govern the day and night and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the fourth day. I mean, it's starting to come together and make more sense now, isn't it? When you see that God's creating these domains and then speaking to the domains to call out more creation. This is going to be very important as we get further in. Then God said, "Let the waters teem with swarms of living creatures, and let the birds fly above the earth in the open expanses of the heavens." And God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarmed, according to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening and there was morning, a fifth day. I'm so glad you pointed that out about starting it with evening. Thank you for that. Then God said, "Let the earth produce living creatures." Let the earth produce living creatures according to their kind, livestock and crawling things, and animals of the earth according to their kind. And it was so. God made the animals according to their kind, and the livestock according to their kind, and everything that crawls on the ground according to their kind. And God saw that it was good. God called out from each domain what would fill it. Now, what happens if you remove a fish from the water? It dies. What happens if you rip a tree from the earth? It dies. Exactly. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Keep this in mind. Then God said, let us, Trinity, make mankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every crawling thing that crawls on the earth. The domain, and this is important, it might be a test question, the domain from which God called forth man was himself. Let us make man in our own image. God called forth humanity from the domain of himself. Test question. What happens then if man is separated from God? He dies. Yeah. The biblical definition for death is separation from God. Separation from God. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. God created man in his own image is the traditional translation here. I was lucky enough that when I was studying this at Dallas, the lead translator for the New King James Version, the Old Testament portion of the New King James Version, was my professor. And he was so frustrated because translation is actually oftentimes a political act as much as it is an intellectual act. And his frustration was the word in Hebrew that's translated as in actually has the meaning of as. Very small difference here. Very small difference, but it changes the meaning here significantly. You see, historically, when an emperor ruled over a large territory, well, as the subjects would become further and further located out from his power center, they needed to be reminded that there was a ruler, that there was somebody in charge. And so the emperor would have a statue made of himself and placed in the town square to remind people in these remote areas that there is a ruler, there is somebody in charge. So the inhabitants would know that. So as the image of God, then Moses is letting us know of our divinely created purpose, which is to serve as a reminder of God to all creation. How's your self-image feeling now? Isn't that amazing? Yeah, to serve as a reminder to all creation of God. To be made as the image of God. The statue in the town square, if you will. The statue for all of creation. The reminder of God to all around you. Now, Shanae and I were chatting at the break, and I had not included this in my notes. I'm going to just throw this out there. Also something very interesting, being made as the image of God. Well, we have a few artists in this crowd. The ability to create. Mankind is very, very unique in the ability to create in very complex forms. Satan has no ability to create. Satan can pervert. He can subvert. The worst form of evil is to have something flipped completely backwards. but he cannot create. You can create. You can create. And there's a great beauty in that. God blessed them. And God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over everything that moves on the earth." Then God said, "Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the surface of all the earth, and every tree which has fruit yielding seed. It shall be food for you. And to every animal of the earth, and to every bird of the sky, and to everything that moves on the earth which has life, I have given every green plant for food." And it was so. And God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was very good. Very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Now notice that at this time, there were no animals for food for man, no animals for food for each other. There was no separation from God, and therefore at this time, no death. No separation from God, and therefore no death. And to the heavens and the earth, and so the heavens and the earth were completed, and all their heavenly lights. By the seventh day, God completed his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all of his work which he had done. Then God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it. I mean, set it apart. Because on it he rested from all his work which God had created and made. What have we seen in this creation narrative? Did God start with what was most beautiful and most complex and work his way down, or no? It's completely opposite, right? He started with what was least complex, least beautiful, and worked forward to that which is most beautiful. What was it he created? Who was it he created last? Woman. Yeah, think on that. Woman. I don't entirely know all the meaning there, but it's very clear that the narrative produced went definitely from least complex, most ugly, to most complex, most beautiful. So
is that why women was created last?
That's a good question. I'm still trying, frankly, to work on
Most complex.
I'm going to say that's true. I'm still trying to work through all of the meaning on that, because I'm going to say I don't know, because we're going to see another creation narrative next week, but which is also equally beautiful, and not. It emphasizes different things. It is not contradictory. So we're going to focus on that. But
Don't you think that's we were given the ability to give birth?
yeah,
So that is beautiful.
absolutely. And we're going to really, thank you for bringing that up, Connie, because that is huge. And we're going to really touch on that too, especially when we're dealing with Adam and Eve post-fall. Because Eve is going to say something that's going to be one of those, whoa, can't really believe she said that. So I'm planting a seed there. It's supposed to be anticipation. So you come back to class, come back to class. But yeah, Shawnee.
It strikes me that the first time we hear the word work, that God was working.
Yeah.
And man works.
Mm-hmm.
Later, was he working from the beginning?
Was who I'm
Is man working?
Yes.
You don't think that he's working until he's sent out?
No. He was working in the garden, and we'll get into that.
When he's working,
Yeah, we will get into that next week. Yeah. And that's why, you have this picture, I think a very false picture of heaven with people sitting around on clouds with lyres having nothing else to do. No, I mean, we were being created as the image of God means that, yeah, we have work. And that's when we're happiest, is when we're engaged, as we went through in class just a few weeks ago. When are you feeling most engaged? And that's when you're working from your spiritual gifts, from how God has gifted you. And you can finish, if you're working from that, you can finish a day jonesing. You can finish a day energized, more energized than when you started. And that's just something wonderful to see. Any questions? Did I slow it down a little bit? Okay.
I was
Okay.
gonna
Yeah.
say that for me, that's when the joy comes, is when
Yeah.
you're doing that work.
Yeah.
So when you're not doing that work is when we get into
Mm-hmm.
things that aren't as positive.
Exactly.
We're getting into our own self and our own flesh and
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And introspection can be good sometimes. Sometimes it will take us places we don't want to go. But yeah, when we're engaged in the work, I mean, when we were talking about the dispensas, and this is one of the things I absolutely love about this church, is this church is sending out several thousand meals each week. That's cool. That is way cool. I'm going to be real frank on this. I mean, I'm a senior pastor at two churches, and college and young single pastor at another church, and spent over a decade on the mission field. It has been so long since I've come across a church like this. It has happened before, but we've seen the toxicity in North America invade a huge portion of the church. And yeah, are there problems here? Of course, we're humans. We screw up. But to think of how successful the early church was, well, what was one of the things they were doing? They were sharing their meals with everybody. And that's effectively what this church is doing. And I just love that. But that has nothing to do with Genesis. Any other questions?
No, you bring up so many thoughts. Because they left the fields for the poor, and the people that didn't have anything, they left a portion of the field. They didn't harvest that.
Yeah.
Because they left it for people who needed it.
Yeah, I'll expand on this. What Connie's talking about is the process of what we call gleaning, for people to, it was God's command to leave a portion of the food in the field so that the poor could come and not have to beg. They could come with their dignity intact and harvest the rest of what was left. I mean, think of how that affects somebody's dignity. That's huge. So yeah, I mean, so much on that. It's one thing to ignore those around you to the point that they have to get out and stand in traffic and put themselves at risk and beg. It's another thing to say, where are the needs? We're going to meet those needs. And that's exactly what God did here, calling forth the cosmos from chaos. And as reminders of God, that's what we're called to do, in part. There's a lot more. But this never happens. I finished early. Enjoy it. Enjoy it a great deal. Because literally, we're just getting started. But do you see the grace of God in the first two verses? God as Redeemer in the first two verses of Genesis. So as we're looking at this Pentateuch, as we're looking at this book of the law, we're going to continue to see the grace and the love of God, which is why I talk too fast. I get excited about it. I get very excited about it. So I will see you guys next week. Thank you for coming.